Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years, and our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it. I'm going to teach on today a little bit. I'm going to just teach about some high-level stuff. That's kind of what I think everyone needs here. Something that I experienced lately. I'm just going to share, be real with that overall, but it has to do with processing. Right? Meaning processing our feelings, our emotions, our challenges, and things that we face, right? And so that's kind of the one thing we talk about. I'm just talking about these 4 pillars, and I'm going to kind of break it down here actually into this. Let me I mess this up, but make sure I have enough room. So I want to talk about just processing, just all these things that we have in our life, but really I want to talk about kind of the pit and all the things that we run into. Right? So what happens is we have all these things that basically this is a pit that we have. What's a pit? It's our bottom, right? It's a hole in our head that we have where we have all these things that happen, life happens, deals go sideways, all these things happen to us. People cancel, people back out, people screw us over.
Place like where you have to feel like you're digging out.
It's a dark place, right? And we all have dark places. Myself, right? President of the United States, every major business person, everyone in here has pits that we're all able to get sucked in very quickly, right? And obviously one of those things that you've seen happen a lot for a lot of people was the Kobe Bryant thing, right? Kobe Bryant obviously passed away in a helicopter. You guys know that. Some of y'all saw my Facebook post. I was on that same fucking helicopter that he died in. Literally rode in the same helicopter in the same seat that he died in. With the same pilot. I found that out last night. The pilot that he was just driving in the fog that crashed it was a pilot who flew me, which is unbelievable. And so you talk about a crazy thing of emotions of how do you adapt and how do you deal with these things. I could have been in that, and obviously that's what I thought for days and been still kind of battling with. I'm over that now, which I'll kind of explain why. But part of it's understanding like all these emotions of like guilt and happiness and what if and like all these different aspects of what that was. And so not only do you have that, and you have the emotions of him and his daughter and all these other people and kids. And so what happens to everybody? They get sucked into that, right? And for most people what happens and kind of how it is they'll last for days and weeks and weeks and weeks. And what happens is ultimately that hurts you because it takes away the most important thing that you have in your life yourself. What do you think that is? That too. It's the real estate. It's the real estate in your mind. Right? That's some of the most expensive real estate that you have ever is the real estate in your mind. Meaning that the more that we dwell on these things, the more that we handle these things, the more we have these on top, right? The more real estate is taken up and the more weight that we're carrying and the more good things that we can't focus on, right? And so how it works is ultimately, right, you have these things that you kind of look at, they're all these triggers that come over and over, right? Let's say 4 here. These triggers, it can be small things like the Kobe Bryant thing. It could be small things like your deal falling through. It could be external things that you see happen, right? It could be the plane that got shot down in Iran or Iraq or whatever. Iran, a couple weeks ago. All these things happen, right? And what happens? People tend to get obsessed with that, right? Look at who all the people were that was on it. What happened? What was the story, right? Obviously, I was very, very in tune to that because I rode in the same damn helicopter. I want to know what happened to him that obviously didn't happen to me and what could have happened to me. Right? I mean, literally the same exact seat. And so that's the crazy part of that, of what that was from the same airport. And that's what kind of had me have an aha, is I saw the helicopter. It was a Sikorsky, right? I'm like, all right, it's flying from SNA, which is Santa Ana Airport, which is where my coach is at. I'm like, all right, that's crazy. And I looked at the flight history. It kept going back and forth from SNA to other places. I'm like, well, shit, I looked at the tail number. It's N17EX. I'm like, all right. So I go back, I'm like, man, something just told me. I was sitting on my dock actually on Sunday, whatever. I was just sitting there, and I was looking. I went back in my photos, and guess what? I pulled up the video of me pulling up, and the helicopter picking me up. Guess what it was? N17EX. I was like, holy shit! It's the same exact helicopter. And so we flew from Santa Ana to Catalina Island. Did the whole thing for a day. Flew back from Catalina to Santa Ana, same airport. Made it, right? And so I'm like freaking out in this regard, and it's obviously a lot of weight because you're dealing with all these emotions, and guess what? It just soaks up everything about you. And so I'm going to have you guys consider today the faster we can process these things, the more successful you'll be. Right? It's a big, big, big thing because most people can't process fast enough. They'll spend days and weeks dwelling on stuff, right? You see it all the time. People will be mad at somebody for something from 6 years ago. Taking all that space in their mind, what's happened is pulling them away from having an opportunity to do something better and be something better, right? And so the same thing with me. I can either process this situation here and move on, or let you dwell on it and take away what? Opportunity for me to execute and move forward my life with the opportunity that I was given. And it comes down to one single thing. What do you think it is?
Decision. Focus.
All that? Deeper, keep going.
Or how well you protect your headspace.
Which is what? Driven by what?
How you frame it.
Deeper, you're going right where I'm looking for. Driven by the stories I tell myself about what happened. Right? And we'll talk about that. The Colby thing ultimately could be a huge, huge tragedy, which it is. Could stay a tragedy in your head, whatever it may be. Or we can look at that was something that happened for a reason that has now inspired billions of people in the past 2 days, right, to hug their loved ones, to make changes, to live all in, and to live the Mamba mentality. Right? I know for me, I've dug in and flipped that switch to learn a lot about his mentality, what he did, and been studying that for 2 days now. And so ultimately, that's something that you can look at all about the story, how it's driven. But the problem is, what happens is we have these triggers that hit us. All you all have, and I watched this happen last week, right? I watched it happen to people in here. I had conversations, some of you guys in here, where you can watch energetically the weight they're carrying. If I can see you in a Thursday meeting or a Tuesday meeting with that weight on top of you, guess what? Your clients can see that too. And they're not going to have certainty because you don't have certainty. Right? And so what happens is the more stories you have, the more triggers you have, the faster you're falling down into the pit. Right? What's the pit again?
Deep place.
Right? It's a dark place.
Dungeon.
Right? And that's one of those things that you have, understandably, kind of looking at what's happened, you fall into this pit. And so what most people try to do is they just try to deal with it their own, themselves. I did it like that all the time. Right? So I was talking to guys on call yesterday about the whole COVID thing, one of which was on the plane, or on the helicopter with me. And we talked about that, and he's, dude, I was snapped at my wife. I got angry because I didn't know how to deal with all these emotions. And luckily he went through and stacked it next morning. We talked about that, is that he had a total frame wrong what that was, right? Because what happens, we have all these emotions, and everyone tends to react to all things happen outside, make and drive them on the inside. When in reality, it should be the inside out, right? And so we end up carrying this weight, energy from all those around us, right? And the same thing happens. We talked about this too. A lot of times in today's time, you know, there's control of energy through basically people that get paid a lot of money to do so. And you can look at it any way you want to. Hence, the overall example of the helicopter crash, knowing that Colby was on that crash, right? Then guess what happened later on half the day?
Another crash.
Well, that was from 2005 actually. The one with the Marine helicopter?
30 people
Yeah, I
killed.
thought I saw something.
People kept sharing that was from 2005.
Oh.
That just shows you Facebook, right? But the reality is they announced that who else died? His daughter, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? 6, 7, 8 hours later. They knew a lot of times that his daughter's probably on that plane because they're flying to the friggin' the basketball place he owned.
Yeah.
Right? And there's these waves of emotion, right? And the same thing happened with the Iran plane.
And then we find out.
Right? Iran shoots plane down. Everybody thinks plane shot down. No one knows what's going on for 3 days. Right? All this speculation. Are we going to go to World War III? Right? Who shot the plane down? Was it the Americans? Whatever it was. 3 days later, what happens? Iran announced, well, we accidentally, our bad, we shot the plane down. Right? And so there's these waves of emotion that we have. And so people think they process something, they don't. And ultimately, they're pulled back into it. Right? And so that's something important.
So I have a question on that. I mean, with social media, and there's always so much tragedy in the world constantly, and we're always exposed to it. So one way that I process, sometimes it doesn't even affect me in a lot of cases. Like the Kobe thing definitely affected me because he's got kids and stuff like that, but it's almost like I'm numb to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not really processing it, I guess.
That's sedation, right?
But that's,
I'll do the same thing.
That's what everyone's like. That's what we're all doing about the apartment being too small and the job and the this and the community.
We all
You don't feel
sedate.
Like, yeah, until you have to.
And so that's one thing that will kill us ultimately is we sedate. Because what happens when I sedate? It works for like a little bit, right? Then what happens? I tend to alienate myself from everyone else, right? From the challenges, from whatever it is. So I never really direct and process that. And so what happens, you're right, these things that we tend to think we ignore tend to stack. And so it stacks and stacks and stacks. And here within the pit is where what is? It's where the pain is. This is why that we ignore it. And so as we ignore that pain, it stacks up and stacks up. What happens to our capacity is it gets to the max. And that's why you see people can deal with stuff, deal with stuff, deal with stuff. And then all of a sudden, when you have a lot of shit on you, what happens? I become really snappy, become really short, really pissed off. Why? Because all these triggers are happening in my pit. And usually when I start to snap, I'm like right here. Right? Unless I deal with myself every morning, or every day. Or even you learn to train yourself to understand what your stories are and how to process that. And that's kind of what I'm going to go through today because it's true, right? We do that. Our clients do that. I want to share with you guys, right? Everyone in here, because ultimately this is how you perform better. One thing I see with you are super high one day, right? Come in the next day, super low. Super high, I'll pump everybody up. Come in on the Monday, right? We'll crush that week. We'll sell like 10, 15 deals as a company, right? Or as a team. Come on Monday and people are like they never even been here before. Do you know what I'm saying? Next thing you know, it's crazy. I've seen it happen all the time. But ultimately, what's it have to do with? All these triggers and pains and things, it could be opportunities, it could be anything. And so the problem is you have to understand what the story is around that. And what most people tend to do, and here's what happens. They'll tend to do what we call a false lift. So they'll go back up here and they're the positive thinkers. Like, oh, everything's great. It's still going to be okay. Everything's going to be good. This was meant to happen for Kobe, right? Whatever it is, the ultimate thing here is total bullshit. And this is what we call a false lift. Why?
Because it's almost like motivation in the morning or whatever. And you just like you're good for 15 minutes and then something else is going to get you. You get a flat tire on the way to work and then you're like, boom, right back down.
Guess what?
You're avoiding process.
You're not really dealing with it.
Right. And so it works for that 1 second, that one morning. Baron, you with me? It works for that one morning, because you want to hear this too. Comes in, one more trigger happens. What happens to that little twig that's holding you up? Right back in the pit. And that's why people do that all the time. They'll be good, bad. And the faster you move back and forth between good and bad, it really has to do with just the more shit you have holding here in your pit. And so ultimately, we have to be able to deal with that, understand that all these triggers, right, that we have here, we'll write those down as triggers, are really just kind of driven by one thing. If I can write this down if you can see it. Are just driven by all these feelings we got. So it could be anger, right? It could be, and all here's thing, with that helicopter thing, I went through all of it. I went through anger, I went through guilt because of shit. What if I was on that thing? Should I have been on that thing? Right? Grateful, glad I'm not on that thing. Like all these things that you have, sad for him and his family, sad for his wife, sad for his other kids, right? What are they experiencing that thing when it went down? Right? I envision myself in that thing spin like a top when I was sitting in that same exact seat. I can see the gold plated everything around me in the gold seat belt on the white leather seats. And so ultimately, you got to understand that these are feelings that we have that we've got to be able to deal with and have something with. What you got?
I guess like as far as like a personal core value goes, like I don't know, I'm having a hard time with this because there are triggers in life that you're going to have to focus on processing, but some of these triggers I find are unnecessary because I believe your input is what's going to equal your output. So for those who sit around and fret over the news all day, of course the world is a horrible place and going to be triggered all the time, but I try to overwhelm that with input from people like Grant or Jared or Ryan Stewman or whoever it is, and I try to hit that first thing in the morning. But now I'm starting to think that may be a form of a false lift. I mean, granted, I'm not going to sit and stare at the news all day or the election cycle because that's just going to piss me off.
Well, that's a learned skill though.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to talk about it in a second. So what you'll find is, and I'll talk about this, you'll find the masses, and I'm going to talk about victors versus victims. So a lot of people are obsessed with that.
Yeah.
Right? If you ever talk to a lot of people that we get some certain clients from conservative radio.
Yeah.
What do they believe that everything's the world's in? There's everything's conspiracy, right? People are obsessed with that stuff sometimes, right? On the flip side, you get everything else. The evil capitalist is killing the whole world, right? They're obsessed with these things. And so these victims and victors, there's difference, right? So they're obsessed with these things. I'll talk about that in a second in regards to what it is. But yes, a lot of that's just a false lift. So what happens? I listen to Grant, get pumped up. If I have not mastered dealing with my emotions or my stories, the first time that my deal goes sideways, what do? I lose my shit, right? And I'm not productive the rest of the day. I go on Facebook and I sedate for the rest of the day. And I don't deal with it, right? Whatever it may be. Well, I sit
How do you balance the two? Because I still want to manage my input at all times.
That's just a cost of admission, I think.
Okay.
Right?
I don't like
That's
that.
programming. That's kind of a separate teaching. So that's going to be programming my mind. Right? I've got to fill my cup up regardless of what happens.
Yeah.
but I'm gonna have shit that happens to me regardless.
Right.
And so what I'm gonna teach on today is what do you do when the shit happens to you? And then for me, the Kobe thing is a great example of me, myself, because I was literally on the same fucking helicopter, right? And so that's something that, dude, I could still be dwelling on today, wanting to know what's going on. What really happened? Did the fog get him? Was it mechanical issues, right? Could that motor gone out when I was in that thing, right? What's going on there? And so then here's the deal. Next time I get on an airplane, what's gonna happen? Right? The same shit, but if I don't process my thing, I can pretend, oh, it was okay, right? False lip. I was on the helicopter. I'm meant to be. God has me to do better things, which is good, right? But next time I get on an airplane, or hopefully I don't want to get on a helicopter if I do, right? The reality is, that's not, you know what I'm saying? But ultimately, that's the one thing that matters, right? And so and here's the thing. One small thing happened to me on that private plane that kind of worried me a little bit. I got on a commercial flight, whatever, a couple weeks ago, and I was kind of still sketched out, right? And so why? Because I hadn't processed my feelings about it yet.
Yeah.
And that's the key. Now, this is to myself. So we all go through this, but what happens is, in real estate, this is where you're going to get the most value, in your deals. What do you do when your shit goes sideways? What do you do when they want to cancel the deal? What do you do, Baron, when the agent wants to pull back the offer that you guys verbally agreed to? Right? That's what the difference is. And so most people can't process that feeling fast enough. But the faster you can process feelings, the faster you find success.